Rain hammered against the windshield as Jasmine watched the wealthy woman slam the door in her face, screaming about cold food and demanding her money back. 24 years old, soaked to the bone, and holding a bag of lukewarm Chinese takeout, she realized this was probably the moment her delivery career officially hit rock bottom. What she didn't know was that the immigrant mother quietly watching from the apartment across the hall would change everything, and that the woman's husband owned half the tech companies Jasmine delivered to every day. The notification chimed on Jasmine's phone at 11:47 p.m., another late-night delivery request pinging through the app. She was parked outside a 24-hour diner in downtown Seattle, engine idling. Watching privileged college kids stumble past her beat-up Honda Civic without a second glance. The rain had been relentless for 3 days straight, turning the city into a gray, unforgiving maze of traffic and impatient customers who treated delivery drivers like they were invisible servants. Jasmine accepted the order, $78 worth of Thai food going to Bellevue, the wealthy suburb where tech executives lived in glass mansions behind electronic gates. She'd been driving for Food Runner for 8 months now, ever since she'd dropped out of her computer science program at the University of Washington. The student loans had become crushing, her mother's medical bills had piled up, and choosing between education and survival wasn't really a choice at all. Every night, she navigated between two worlds: the struggling neighborhoods where people counted every dollar, and the affluent areas where people ordered $100 meals without thinking twice. The Thai restaurant was closing when she arrived, and the teenager behind the counter barely looked up as he handed her the bags. Jasmine checked the order twice. She'd learned the hard way that wealthy customers were the first to complain about missing items. And, unlike working-class clients who understood that mistakes happened, they had the time and energy to destroy a driver's rating over a forgotten sauce packet. She secured the food in her heated delivery bag, the one investment she'd made to keep meals warm during long drives. The GPS directed her through increasingly expensive neighborhoods, where streetlights illuminated perfect lawns and luxury cars parked in circular driveways. These houses represented everything Jasmine had studied for, the tech wealth that had transformed Seattle into a city of extreme contrasts. She dreamed of writing code that changed the world, of joining the innovators who built the future. Instead, she delivered their dinner while they worked late in home offices worth more than most people's entire houses. The delivery address led her to a modern architectural marvel. All clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed glimpses of minimalist furniture and expensive art. Jasmine walked up the stone pathway, noting the Tesla Model S in the driveway and the subtle security cameras tracking her movement. The doorbell played a complex musical chime that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She waited, shifting the warm bags in her arms, checking her phone for any special delivery instructions. The door opened to reveal a woman in her 50s. Perfectly styled blonde hair and a silk blouse that probably cost more than Jasmine's weekly earnings. The woman's expression immediately shifted from mild curiosity to visible annoyance as she took in Jasmine's appearance. The rain-damp delivery uniform, the modest car in her driveway, the evident youth and ethnicity that marked her as different from the usual service providers in this neighborhood. "You're late," the woman announced, though Jasmine's phone showed she was actually 3 minutes early, "and I specifically requested that the food be kept hot. This better not be cold, because I'm not paying for substandard service." She spoke with the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, someone who had never wondered whether a delivery driver could afford to eat the food they transported. Jasmine forced a professional smile, the same expression she'd perfected for dealing with difficult customers who saw her as an inconvenience rather than a person. The woman inspected each container with theatrical suspicion, opening lids and hovering her hand over the food to test the temperature. "This pad thai is barely warm," she declared, though steam was clearly rising from the noodles. "And where's my extra spring roll?" "I ordered extra spring rolls." Jasmine politely checked the receipt, confirming that no extra spring rolls had been requested, but the woman cut her off with an impatient gesture. "Don't argue with me. I know what I ordered." The confrontation continued for several minutes, with the woman becoming increasingly hostile and demanding a full refund while keeping the food. Jasmine explained the restaurant's policy and offered to contact customer service, but the woman's voice rose to a volume that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. "I don't care about your policies. I want my money back, and I want it now. This is exactly why people like you shouldn't be in customer service. You have no idea how to treat your betters." Other houses began showing signs of life, porch lights flickering on and curtains shifting as neighbors investigated the commotion. Jasmine felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but she maintained her composure, knowing that any defensive response would only escalate the situation and potentially cost her the job she desperately needed. The woman finally snatched the food and slammed the door, but not before threatening to report Jasmine to both the app and the restaurant, promising to destroy her driver rating and get her fired. Standing alone in the rain, Jasmine felt the familiar weight of invisibility settle over her shoulders. To customers like this woman, she wasn't a person with dreams, struggles, or intelligence. She was just a service provider who had failed to meet expectations. The woman would eat the food Jasmine had delivered while simultaneously filing complaints designed to damage her livelihood, never considering the human cost of her cruelty. It was a reminder of her place in the economic hierarchy, a reinforcement of the barriers that kept people like her trapped in survival mode. As Jasmine walked back to her car, she noticed movement in the apartment building across the street. A young woman stood at a window on the second floor, holding a small child and watching the scene unfold. Even from a distance, Jasmine could see the woman's posture tired, worried, the stance of someone who recognized struggle because she lived it daily. Their eyes met for a moment, and Jasmine saw something that had been absent from her interaction with the wealthy customer: understanding, empathy, the acknowledgement of shared humanity. The next week brought more of the same endless deliveries to tech campuses where young millionaires ordered artisanal sandwiches, luxury condos where hedge fund managers summoned sushi at midnight, and suburban mansions where executives' wives complained about everything from delivery time to parking location. Jasmine developed an internal map of Seattle's economic geography, learning which neighborhoods tipped well and which treated drivers like unwelcome intruders. She memorized the faces of regular customers, the ones who remembered her name and the ones who looked through her like she was invisible. But her attention kept drifting back to the apartment building across from the hostile customer's house. During subsequent deliveries to that neighborhood, she found herself glancing toward the second-floor window where she'd seen the young mother. The building was clearly subsidized housing, a stark contrast to the surrounding affluent soldier construction, smaller units, residents who walked instead of driving luxury cars. It represented the hidden Seattle that wealthy tech workers rarely acknowledged, the service economy that supported their comfortable lives while struggling to survive on the margins. One rainy Thursday evening, Jasmine was delivering pizza to a house 2 blocks away when she noticed the same young woman from the window walking toward the bus stop. She was pushing a stroller while balancing grocery bags and struggling with an umbrella that clearly had seen better days. The woman appeared to be in her late 20s, with dark hair and tired eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Her clothes were clean but worn, the practical outfit of someone who couldn't afford to care about fashion trends. As Jasmine completed her delivery, she watched the woman wait at the bus stop with her toddler, checking her phone repeatedly and shifting nervously as the minutes passed. The next bus wasn't scheduled for another 20 minutes, and the rain was intensifying. Jasmine found herself slowing as she drove past. Noting the woman's protective posture over her child and the way she kept checking her watch with increasing anxiety, there was something achingly familiar about the scene, the visible stress of someone trying to manage an impossible schedule with inadequate resources. The following night, Jasmine deliberately took a route that passed the apartment building. The young mother was visible in her kitchen window, feeding her child dinner at a small table. The apartment appeared modest but clean, with children's drawings taped to the refrigerator and laundry hanging on a drying rack. It was a scene of domestic simplicity that contrasted sharply with the tech wealth surrounding it. A reminder that not everyone in Seattle's boom economy had benefited from the region's prosperity. Jasmine began paying closer attention to the building during her deliveries to the area. She noticed that most residents appeared to be immigrants or people of color, families with children who played in the small courtyard during good weather. The building's entry required a security code, but she could see the mailboxes through the glass door names like Rodriguez, Nguyen, Okafor, representing the diverse community of people who had come to America seeking better opportunities, but found themselves struggling in one of the country's most expensive cities. Young mother's routine became familiar to Jasmine through casual observation. She left the building every weekday at 7:30 a.m., pushing her stroller toward the bus stop while speaking on the phone in what sounded like accented English. She returned in the early evening, often carrying grocery bags or pharmacy purchases, always focused on her child's needs above her own comfort. There was a determination in her movements that Jasmine recognized, the careful planning required when every decision had financial consequences. During a particularly busy Friday night, Jasmine was delivering Chinese food to the tech executive mansion when she noticed unusual activity at the apartment building. Several police cars were parked outside, their lights reflecting off the wet pavement. A small crowd of residents had gathered in the courtyard, speaking in hushed tones and gesturing toward the building's upper floors. The young mother stood near the entrance, holding her child close while talking to an officer who was taking notes in a small pad. Jasmine completed her delivery quickly, despite the customer's usual complaints about timing and temperature. Her curiosity about the police presence was stronger than her desire to avoid the neighborhood drama that often accompanied low-income housing. As she drove past the building, she could see that the officer was asking questions, while the young mother responded with obvious stress and concern. Other residents watched from their windows, and the overall atmosphere suggested something serious had occurred. The next morning, Jasmine stopped at her usual coffee shop and overheard two police officers discussing the incident. Apparently, there had been a break-in at the apartment building, with several units being ransacked while residents were at work. The officers mentioned that it appeared to be targeted at immigrant families, possibly connected to rumors about people keeping cash or valuables at home because they didn't trust banks or couldn't access traditional financial services. The conversation reinforced Jasmine's growing understanding of the vulnerabilities faced by the building's residents. Over the following days, she noticed increased security measures at the building, new locks, additional lighting, and residents who seemed more cautious about their surroundings. The young mother now checked her surroundings carefully before entering the building, and her phone conversations appeared more urgent and worried. Jasmine found herself wondering about the woman's circumstances, whether she was married, where she worked, how she managed to afford rent in Seattle, even in subsidized housing. The observation became a regular part of Jasmine's routine, not from nosiness, but from a growing sense of connection to someone whose struggles seemed parallel to her own. Both women were young. Both appeared to be navigating life without obvious family support. Both were working hard to maintain stability in an expensive and often unwelcoming city. The difference was that Jasmine had been born in America and spoke English as her first language, advantages that she was beginning to recognize as significant privileges in determining life outcomes. One evening, while delivering Thai food to another mansion in the neighborhood, Jasmine saw the young mother standing outside her building, talking rapidly on the phone while her child played with a small toy on the steps. Even from a distance, the woman's body language conveyed distress, pacing, gesturing, occasionally wiping her eyes. The conversation appeared intense and emotional, and when it ended, the woman sat down heavily on the steps, holding her child close while staring at the phone with obvious despair. The emergency alert came through Jasmine's phone at 6:43 p.m. on a Tuesday that had started like any other. A winter storm was approaching Seattle with unprecedented intensity ice, heavy snow, and wind gusts that would make driving dangerous for the next 48 hours. The city was advising residents to stock up on essentials and avoid unnecessary travel. Within minutes, delivery requests began flooding in as people realized they needed groceries, medication, and comfort food before the storm hit. Jasmine was finishing a sushi delivery to a downtown high-rise when the requests started multiplying faster than she could accept them. Wealthy customers were panic ordering everything from organic groceries to expensive wine, treating the approaching storm as an inconvenience that money could solve. The surge pricing kicked in automatically, meaning delivery fees tripled. But the tips remained inconsistent. Some customers appreciated the hazardous conditions, while others seemed angry that their usual service was more expensive. By 8 p.m., the first ice began forming on her windshield. Jasmine had already completed 6 deliveries, navigating increasingly treacherous roads, while other drivers began calling it quits for the night. Her phone buzzed constantly with new orders, each one offering higher surge pricing as the available driver pool shrank. She knew she should probably head home to her small apartment, but the money was too good to ignore. A single night of storm deliveries could cover her rent for the month. The order that changed everything came in at 9:15 p.m. It was from a grocery store in Bellevue, requesting delivery to the apartment building she'd been observing for weeks. The order was modest baby formula, diapers, milk, bread, and soup, but the total was $47, and the customer had added a $15 tip, which was generous for someone who clearly wasn't wealthy. The delivery address confirmed what Jasmine had suspected. It was the young mother from the second-floor window. Driving to the grocery store required careful navigation through streets that were becoming increasingly dangerous. Other drivers had retreated indoors, leaving Jasmine as one of the few delivery people still working. The store was chaos, shelves emptied by panicked shoppers, long lines at checkout, and employees working frantically to restock essential items. The baby formula section was completely cleared out except for one expensive brand that most families couldn't afford. The store clerk handed Jasmine the bags with an apologetic expression. "We had to substitute a lot of items," he explained. "Most of the cheap formula is gone, so we upgraded her to the premium brand at the same price. Same with the diapers. We gave her the organic ones instead of the store brand she ordered." Jasmine nodded, understanding that these substitutions, while well-intentioned, might represent a significant financial burden for a customer who had carefully selected the least expensive options. The drive to the apartment building was treacherous. Ice had formed on the roads, and her Honda Civic struggled for traction on the hills leading to Bellevue. Several times she had to stop and wait for her windshield wipers to clear accumulated ice. And she passed 2 cars that had slid off the road and been abandoned by their drivers. The wealthy neighborhood was eerily quiet, with expensive cars safely parked in heated garages while their owners waited out the storm in comfortable homes. When Jasmine arrived at the apartment building, she could see that the parking lot was a sheet of ice. Several residents were struggling to navigate the treacherous conditions, and the building's heating system appeared to be working overtime. Visible steam rising from exhaust vents, the young mother's window was lit, and Jasmine could see her silhouette moving around what appeared to be a very small kitchen, occasionally checking outside at the worsening weather conditions. She gathered the grocery bags and carefully made her way to the building's entrance, using the handrail to avoid slipping on the icy steps. The security door required a code, so she pressed the apartment number and waited for a response. The voice that answered was tired and worried, speaking accented English with what sounded like stress and exhaustion. "Yes? Who is this, please?" "Food runner delivery," Jasmine responded. "I have your grocery order." There was a pause, then the sound of hurried footsteps on stairs. The young woman appeared behind the glass door, and Jasmine got her first close look at the mother she'd been observing from a distance. She was prettier than Jasmine had realized, with intelligent dark eyes and delicate features, but her expression was drawn with worry and fatigue that made her appear older than her probable age. The woman opened the door cautiously, and Jasmine immediately noticed that she was shivering despite wearing a heavy sweater. The building's lobby was noticeably cold, suggesting that the heating system was struggling to keep up with the extreme weather. Behind the woman, a toddler peeked around her legs, a beautiful child with curly dark hair and curious eyes, who couldn't have been more than 2 years old. "Thank you so much for coming in this weather," the woman said, her accent more pronounced in person. "I was worried no one would deliver tonight, but my baby needs formula and ... She gestured helplessly at the storm outside. "I cannot drive in this ice. I do not have car anyway." Her honesty was refreshing after a day of dealing with wealthy customers who complained about minor inconveniences while having every resource available to solve their problems. Jasmine handed over the bags and explained the substitutions the store had made. The woman's face fell as she realized the implications. The premium formula and organic diapers would likely strain her budget, but she needed these items regardless of cost. "How much extra?" she asked quietly, already reaching for her wallet with obvious reluctance. The question revealed that every dollar mattered in her household calculations. "No extra charge," Jasmine replied. "The store policy is to upgrade at the same price during emergencies." It wasn't entirely true. There would probably be additional charges when the order was processed, but Jasmine couldn't bear to add financial stress to what was already a difficult situation. The woman's relief was immediate and profound, suggesting that even a small unexpected expense could have created serious problems for her family. As the woman prepared to close the door, her phone rang. She answered quickly, and even though the conversation was in a language Jasmine couldn't understand, the tone was unmistakably urgent and distressing. The woman's voice rose with emotion, and she kept glancing at her child while responding to whatever news she was receiving. When the call ended, she stood frozen for a moment, staring at the phone with obvious shock and fear. "Is everything okay?" Jasmine asked, though she knew it was probably none of her business. The woman looked up with tears in her eyes, struggling to find words in English adequate to explain whatever crisis had just unfolded. "My husband," she finally managed. "There is problem with his work. Big problem. I don't know what to do." The fear in her voice was visceral, suggesting that whatever had happened threatened their fundamental security. The storm continued for 3 days, but the real crisis in the young mother's life was just beginning. Jasmine learned fragments of the story through subsequent deliveries to the neighborhood the woman's husband had been detained by immigration authorities during a workplace raid, leaving her alone with their toddler and no clear understanding of when or if he might return. The news spread through the apartment building's immigrant community like wildfire, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that was palpable even to outsiders. Jasmine found herself taking deliveries to the area more frequently, partly from genuine customer demand, but increasingly from her own desire to check on the situation. She learned that the woman's name was Elena, and that she had been in the United States for only 3 years, speaking limited English and working part-time cleaning offices while her husband supported the family through construction work. Without his income, Elena was facing eviction within weeks, with no family support system and limited understanding of available resources. The apartment building itself became a focal point of community crisis. Immigration raids had targeted several other families in the building, and those who remained lived in constant fear of deportation. Children who had been playing in the courtyard disappeared indoors, and residents avoided unnecessary interaction with outsiders. The building's atmosphere shifted from struggling but hopeful to genuinely desperate, with families sharing resources and information while trying to maintain their grip on stability in America. Elena's situation deteriorated rapidly. Jasmine observed her spending hours on the phone, presumably trying to locate her husband or understand her legal options. The toddler seemed to sense the changed atmosphere, becoming clingy and fussy during the few times Jasmine saw them together outside the building. Elena's appearance reflected her stress, dark circles under her eyes, trembling hands when she handled money, the hollow look of someone who wasn't sleeping or eating properly. The wealthy neighborhood surrounding the apartment building remained oblivious to the crisis unfolding in their midst. Tech executives continued ordering expensive meals delivered to their warm houses, complaining about minor inconveniences while immigrant families faced deportation and separation. The contrast became increasingly stark to Jasmine, who navigated between these two worlds multiple times each day, carrying luxury items to people who had everything while knowing that families blocks away were facing homelessness. Local news coverage of the immigration raids focused on policy debates and political implications, with little attention paid to the human costs being paid by families like Elena's. The apartment building was mentioned briefly as one of several locations targeted, but the residents' individual stories remained invisible to the broader Seattle community. Jasmine realized that Elena and her neighbors existed in a parallel city, present physically, but absent from the consciousness of the people who benefited from their labor. Elena's financial situation became desperate with alarming speed. Without her husband's construction income, she couldn't afford rent, utilities, or even basic groceries. The part-time cleaning work that had supplemented their household income was insufficient to support a family alone, and her limited English made it difficult to find additional employment quickly. Jasmine watched her neighbor's life unravel in real time, understanding that Elena was weeks away from homelessness, despite working hard and following all the rules. The toddler's needs added another layer of complexity to Elena's crises. Daycare had become unaffordable without her husband's income, limiting Elena's ability to work additional hours or search for better employment. The child needed consistent meals, medical care, and emotional stability that Elena was struggling to provide while managing her own trauma and uncertainty. Jasmine observed Elena making impossible choices, choosing between heating and food, between formula and rent money, between hope and preparation for the worst-case scenario. Other immigrant families in the building were dealing with similar crises, but they had limited resources to help each other. The community that had provided emotional support was now struggling collectively, with multiple families facing deportation, job loss, and financial ruin simultaneously. The social networks that might have provided assistance in better times were stretched beyond capacity, leaving individual families to navigate their crises essentially alone. Jasmine's own financial situation prevented her from providing meaningful assistance beyond occasional small gestures. Her delivery job barely covered her own expenses, and she was still carrying student loan debt from her interrupted education. She watched Elena's situation with growing frustration, understanding that systematic problems required systematic solutions, but feeling powerless to address the immediate human suffering she witnessed daily. The weather had cleared, but Elena's world remained in chaos. Jasmine noticed that she was losing weight, probably from skipping meals to ensure her child had enough food. Her appearance became increasingly haggard, and she seemed to age years in the span of weeks. The confident young mother Jasmine had first observed through the window was disappearing, replaced by someone who moved through each day in survival mode, focused entirely on immediate necessities with no energy left for anything beyond basic functioning. Elena's limited English became an additional barrier as she tried to navigate legal resources, social services, and employment opportunities. Jasmine watched her struggle with phone calls, repeatedly asking for clarification and becoming frustrated when complex information was delivered too quickly for her to understand. The language barrier that had been manageable when Elena had her husband's support became a significant obstacle during her crisis, preventing her from accessing help that might have been available. The apartment building's management company showed no sympathy for residents' immigration-related crises. Eviction notices appeared on several doors, including Elena's, with strict deadlines that made no accommodation for extraordinary circumstances. The business of housing continued regardless of the human drama unfolding within the building, with property managers focused on rent collection rather than the welfare of families facing deportation and separation. The breaking point came on a Friday evening when Jasmine arrived at the apartment building to find Elena sitting on the front steps in the cold, holding her crying toddler while staring at an eviction notice. It was 6 p.m., and the property management office had clearly delivered the final warning during business hours when Elena would have been at work. The notice gave her 72 hours to pay her back rent or vacate the premises, an impossible deadline given her circumstances. Jasmine parked her car and approached cautiously, unsure whether Elena would welcome interaction from a stranger. The young mother looked up with tears streaming down her face, recognizing Jasmine as the delivery driver who had been kind during the storm. "They say I must leave," Elena said simply, holding up the eviction notice with shaking hands. "I have no money, no family here. I don't know where to go with my baby." For a moment, Jasmine stood frozen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Elena's crisis and her own inability to solve it. Then something shifted inside her, a recognition that standing by and watching injustice unfold was its own form of participation. She sat down next to Elena on the cold concrete steps, ignoring the dampness seeping through her jeans. "How much do you owe?" she asked quietly. Elena showed her the notice. $3,200 in back rent, plus late fees, an amount that might as well have been $1 million given her current resources. It was also more money than Jasmine had ever possessed at one time. But she found herself calculating possibilities. Her savings account had $1,800 from months of careful budgeting and storm-related surge earnings. Her credit card had a $2,000 limit, with most of it available. It was every dollar she had managed to accumulate, her entire financial safety net, but she was looking at a mother and child who were about to become homeless. "I have idea," Jasmine said slowly, the plan forming as she spoke. "I pay your rent. You work to pay me back when you can. No interest, no rush. Just family helping family." The words surprised her as much as they surprised Elena. She hadn't planned to make such an offer, but it felt like the only decent response to witnessing preventable suffering. Elena stared at her in shock, unable to immediately process the unexpected lifeline. The logistics were complicated but manageable. Jasmine drove Elena to the property management office the next morning, navigating the bureaucracy of payment processing and receipt documentation. The office manager was surprised to see the rent paid in full, clearly having expected Elena to default and face eviction. Jasmine used her credit card for the full amount, knowing it would take months to pay off, but believing that housing a family was worth the financial sacrifice. Elena's gratitude was overwhelming and complicated. She insisted on creating a written repayment plan. Despite Jasmine's assurances that there was no rush, her pride had been damaged by accepting help, but her relief at avoiding homelessness was profound. She promised to find additional work, to pay back every dollar, to somehow justify the stranger's faith in her family's worth. Jasmine recognized the complex emotions involved in accepting help and tried to frame the assistance as a loan rather than charity. Word of Jasmine's intervention spread through the apartment building's immigrant community, creating a mixture of hope and increased desperation. Other families facing similar crises began approaching her with their own stories, each one heartbreaking and legitimate. But Jasmine had exhausted her financial resources on Elena's situation. She found herself in the uncomfortable position of having helped one family while being unable to assist others facing identical problems. Elena threw herself into finding additional work with renewed energy. Her housing crisis had been temporarily resolved, giving her the stability needed to focus on long-term solutions. She applied for every available position, attended English classes at the community center, and began developing a small house-cleaning business serving the wealthy neighborhood surrounding her apartment building. Jasmine watched her transformation from despair to determination with admiration and growing concern about her own financial situation. The credit card debt weighed heavily on Jasmine's mind, but she had no regrets about the decision. Her delivery earnings were now dedicated entirely to minimum payments and basic living expenses, with no room for savings or emergencies. She had traded her financial security for Elena's housing stability. A choice that felt morally correct but practically terrifying. Every car repair or unexpected expense could now become a crisis for her own family of one. Elena's cleaning business began slowly but grew through word-of-mouth recommendations within the wealthy neighborhood. Jasmine often saw her walking between houses, carrying supplies and moving with the focused energy of someone determined to rebuild her life. The work was hard and poorly paid, but it was flexible enough to accommodate her childcare needs and required no background checks that might complicate her immigration status. The arrangement created an unexpected friendship between the two young women. Elena would text Jasmine updates on her progress, share pictures of her son reaching developmental milestones, and express gratitude that went far beyond financial obligation. Jasmine found herself invested in Elena's success in ways that surprised her, checking in regularly and celebrating small victories like securing a new cleaning client or receiving a particularly generous tip. But their growing connection also revealed the complexity of Elena's situation. During conversations conducted in Elena's improving English, Jasmine learned that her husband's detention was part of a larger immigration crackdown targeting construction workers across the region. Elena lived in constant fear that she might be deported before reuniting with him, leaving their American-born son in an impossible situation. The trauma of family separation was ongoing, affecting every aspect of Elena's daily life. Elena's resilience impressed everyone who met her, but Jasmine recognized the toll that constant stress was taking on her new friend. She was working multiple cleaning jobs while caring for a toddler, attending English classes, and trying to navigate the legal system to locate her husband. The schedule was unsustainable. But Elena had no choice except to maintain the pace until her situation stabilized or collapsed entirely. The wealthy clients Elena cleaned for remained largely oblivious to her personal circumstances. They saw her as an efficient, quiet worker who left their homes spotless without requiring much interaction. Some were kind and paid well. Others were demanding and dismissive, treating Elena as invisible labor rather than recognizing her as an educated woman facing extraordinary circumstances. Jasmine began to understand how economic desperation made people vulnerable to exploitation, even from well-meaning employers. 3 months after paying Elena's rent, Jasmine was delivering dinner to one of the tech mansions when she noticed Elena's car parked in the circular driveway. It was the first time she'd seen Elena working in this particular house, and Jasmine felt an odd sense of connection. Both women earning money from the same wealthy family, though in very different capacities. She completed her delivery to the modern home, noting the expensive cars and architectural details that spoke of serious wealth. The next week, Jasmine was assigned another delivery to the same address. As she walked up the stone pathway, she could see Alina through the floor-to-ceiling windows, methodically cleaning what appeared to be a massive home office filled with multiple computer monitors and expensive equipment. The room looked like a tech executive's command center. The kind of setup Jasmine recognized from her computer science studies: serious money and serious computing power. Alina noticed Jasmine through the window and waved, causing the homeowner to look up from his computer with mild curiosity. Jasmine got her first clear look at the man who lived in this architectural marvel. He appeared to be in his 40s, casually dressed in expensive clothes, with the confident posture of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. His glance toward Jasmine was dismissive, the way wealthy people looked at service workers who temporarily intruded on their space. The delivery was routine, expensive Japanese food that cost more than Elena probably earned in a day of cleaning. The homeowner barely acknowledged Jasmine's existence, accepting the bags without eye contact while continuing a phone conversation about stock options and quarterly projections. His tone suggested someone managing significant business interests. The kind of tech wealth that had transformed Seattle's economy. Jasmine left without learning his name, but she filed away details about the house and its owner. Over the following weeks, Jasmine noticed Alina working at the house more frequently. During brief conversations, Alina mentioned that she'd been hired as a regular housekeeper for a very wealthy family, paying well enough that she could reduce her other cleaning jobs. The work was demanding but stable, and the family seemed decent if somewhat distant. Alina was grateful for the steady income, which was helping her pay down her debt to Jasmine ahead of schedule. One evening, Jasmine was delivering late-night sushi to the house when she encountered Alina leaving through the service entrance. Alina looked exhausted but satisfied, carrying cleaning supplies to her car while talking rapidly on her phone in Spanish. She waved to Jasmine but continued her conversation, which seemed intense and emotional. Jasmine wondered if Alina had received news about her husband's immigration case, which had been progressing slowly through the legal system. The breakthrough came completely by accident. Jasmine was delivering coffee and pastries to the house early on a Saturday morning when the homeowner answered the door himself, apparently giving his housekeeper the weekend off. He was wearing pajamas and a robe that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and his hair was disheveled from sleep. Behind him, Jasmine could see multiple screens displaying what looked like financial data and news feeds from international markets. "You're here early," he commented, accepting the coffee bags without offering a tip. Wasn't expecting delivery until later. His accent was slight but noticeable, not American, though he spoke perfect English. Jasmine apologized for any confusion while noting details about his appearance and demeanor. There was something familiar about his features, though she couldn't place where she might have seen him before. As she walked back to her car, Jasmine noticed a luxury sedan pulling into the driveway. The driver was a well-dressed woman who appeared to be arriving for a business meeting, carrying a briefcase and checking her phone with the focused energy of someone managing important affairs. The woman nodded politely to Jasmine but clearly assumed she was household staff, rather than acknowledging her as an equal professional, another example of how invisible service workers became in wealthy environments. Later that week, Alina mentioned that her employer would be traveling internationally for several weeks, giving her a temporary break from the intensive cleaning schedule. She seemed relieved to have more time with her son, but also worried about the temporary reduction in income. Alina had been making good progress on repaying Jasmine, but the travel break would slow her financial recovery. She promised to find additional work to make up the difference, displaying the constant anxiety of someone living without economic security. The revelation came through an overheard phone conversation. Jasmine was delivering lunch to a nearby house when she encountered Elena walking her son in a stroller, taking advantage of good weather and her temporary break from work. They stopped to chat with Elena's son, charming Jasmine with his developing vocabulary and obvious intelligence. Elena seemed more relaxed than Jasmine had seen her in months, finally allowing herself to enjoy time with her child without constant financial pressure. Elena's phone rang and she answered in Spanish before switching to heavily accented English. "Yes, Mr. Vasquez," she said formally. "I understand you returned Tuesday. I will have everything ready for your arrival." The conversation continued with Elena discussing household arrangements, security protocols, and meal preparations for what sounded like important business guests. When she hung up, Elena looked apologetic for taking the call during their conversation. "Vasquez," Jasmine repeated. Recognizing the name from news coverage she'd been following about tech industry acquisitions and cryptocurrency investments, "Is that Antonio Vasquez?" Elena nodded. Not understanding why Jasmine looked suddenly shocked, Antonio Vasquez was one of Seattle's most prominent tech billionaires, a cryptocurrency pioneer whose companies had revolutionized online payment systems. His net worth was estimated in the billions, making him one of the wealthiest people in the Pacific Northwest. Elena had been cleaning house for one of the richest men in America while living in subsidized housing and facing eviction. The irony was staggering. She dusted the computers that managed billion-dollar investments while counting every dollar in her own household budget. Jasmine realized that Elena had been working inside a mansion worth more than most small towns while her own family lived paycheck to paycheck, invisible to her wealthy employer, despite being responsible for maintaining his personal environment. The connection explained many details Jasmine had noticed but not understood. The expensive security system, the international business calls, the high-end computer equipment, the stream of well-dressed visitors. Elena worked at the center of a financial empire while struggling to afford basic necessities for her own family. The contrast represented everything wrong with economic inequality in modern America, where billionaires lived surrounded by service workers who couldn't afford to live in the communities they served. The final piece of the puzzle emerged 3 weeks later, when Jasmine received an unusual request through the delivery app. Instead of food, she was asked to transport a package from a downtown law office to the Vasquez mansion, with specific instructions to wait for a signed receipt. The fee was substantial, $200 for what should have been a routine delivery, suggesting that the contents were either urgent or confidential. The law office was located in one of Seattle's most prestigious buildings, occupying an entire floor with panoramic views of Elliott Bay. The package was handed to Jasmine by a paralegal who emphasized its importance and provided detailed delivery instructions. The envelope was thick and official-looking, marked with immigration law firm letterhead that made Jasmine's heart race as she connected the dots between Elena's situation and this mysterious delivery. During the drive to Bellevue, Jasmine's mind raced through possibilities. Elena had mentioned that her husband's immigration case was progressing through the legal system, but she had seemed increasingly worried about the outcome rather than hopeful. The timing of this delivery, combined with Elena's temporary absence from work, suggested that something significant was happening in the Vasquez household that related to immigration law. Jasmine arrived at the mansion to find Elena's car in the driveway, despite her supposed break from work. The front door was answered by Antonio Vasquez himself, who looked unusually formal despite being in his own home. He accepted the package with obvious relief, signing the receipt quickly and offering Jasmine a generous tip, the first time he had acknowledged her service with more than basic politeness. As Jasmine prepared to leave, she heard voices from inside the house. Elena was speaking in rapid Spanish, her voice carrying the emotional intensity that Jasmine had learned to associate with news about her husband's case. There was also a male voice responding, but it wasn't Antonio Vasquez. The accent and tone were different, younger, and more familiar. Jasmine paused at her car, listening to the conversation that was clearly visible through the open doorway. Elena appeared in the foyer, followed by a man Jasmine had never seen before, but who bore a striking resemblance to Elena's toddler. He was tall and handsome, wearing expensive clothes that fit perfectly, and he moved with the confidence of someone comfortable in wealthy surroundings. Elena was crying and laughing simultaneously, repeating mi amore, while embracing him tightly. The scene was clearly a reunion between Elena and her husband, but something was wrong with the picture. The man's clothes were too expensive, his English too perfect. His comfort in the mansion too natural for someone who had been detained in immigration custody. As Jasmine watched, Antonio Vasquez joined the couple in the foyer, placing his hand on the man's shoulder with obvious affection and familiarity. The three adults stood together like family, while Elena's son toddled toward the man, calling Papa, Papa, with delighted recognition. Realization hit Jasmine like a physical blow. Elena's husband wasn't an undocumented construction worker. He was related to Antonio Vasquez, possibly his son or nephew. The immigration crisis had been real. But it wasn't about deportation. It was about some kind of family dispute or business complication that had temporarily separated him from his wife and child. Elena's poverty wasn't circumstantial. It was manufactured, possibly as punishment or test. The legal package Jasmine had delivered contained documents resolving whatever conflict had kept Elena's husband away from his family. The reunion she was witnessing represented the end of Elena's artificial crisis, the restoration of her access to the Vasquez family wealth. The young mother who had faced eviction while cleaning billionaire's house was actually connected to that wealth through marriage, making her suffering a form of internal family drama rather than systemic poverty. Elena noticed Jasmine standing frozen beside her car and approached with obvious embarrassment. Jasmine, I need to explain, she said quietly, her accent suddenly less pronounced than it had been during months of conversation. My situation was complicated. My husband and his father had disagreement about business, about me, about many things. His father thought I was only interested in money, so he cut Miguel off financially to test whether I would stay or leave. The explanation continued in Elena's improved English, revealing that she had been educated in Mexico before immigrating, that her language difficulties had been partially performed to maintain the deception, that her poverty had been imposed rather than natural. Miguel Vasquez had been forbidden from contacting his family or accessing his trust fund, until his father decided that Elena had proven herself worthy of the family wealth. The immigration raid story had been a cover for what was essentially an elaborate family test. I could not tell you truth, Elena continued, tears streaming down her face. Antonio wanted to see if I would survive without money, if I would still love Miguel without wealth, but I was so scared, so alone. When you helped me with rent, you saved my family even though you thought I was nobody. You gave everything to help a stranger who was lying to you about everything. Jasmine stood in the driveway of a billionaire's mansion, processing the revelation that her months of financial sacrifice had been based on an elaborate deception. Elena hadn't been a struggling immigrant mother. She was the daughter-in-law of one of America's wealthiest men, enduring temporary hardship as part of a twisted family loyalty test. The money Jasmine had borrowed to pay Elena's rent represented genuine sacrifice from someone who had nothing, given to someone who was connected to unlimited wealth. Antonio Vasquez approached them, his expression combining guilt and admiration. Ms. Torres, he said formally, Elena has told me everything about your generosity. You sacrificed your financial security to help my daughter-in-law when you believed she was facing homelessness. Your character is exactly what I hoped to find in Elena, but you demonstrated it without any expectation of reward. The conversation that followed revealed the full scope of the deception. Antonio had orchestrated Elena's poverty as a test of her commitment to Miguel, wanting to ensure that she loved his son rather than his money. Elena had been forbidden from revealing her true circumstances to anyone, forced to live as a struggling single mother while cleaning the house that could have been her home. The test had been designed to last 1 year. But Elena's depression and desperation had convinced Antonio to end it early. "You have shown more integrity in 3 months than most people demonstrate in lifetime," Antonio continued. "Elena tells me you borrowed money you could not afford to lose. Money you are still paying back with interest to prevent the eviction of women you barely knew. This is a character that deserves recognition and reward." Miguel joined the conversation, expressing gratitude for Jasmine's kindness to his family and apologizing for the deception that had made it necessary. He explained that his father's test had been cruel, but understandable. The Vasquez family had been targeted by numerous fortune hunters over the years, making genuine relationships difficult to identify. Elena's willingness to endure poverty while maintaining her dignity had proven her authenticity. But Jasmine's sacrifice had revealed something unexpected about the kindness of strangers. The resolution was swift and overwhelming. Antonio offered to pay off Jasmine's credit card debt immediately, along with a substantial reward for her generosity. But more importantly, he offered her something that aligned with her abandoned dreams: a position with his technology companies, using her computer science background to join his cybersecurity team. The salary was more than she had imagined possible, with benefits that would transform her life as dramatically as her kindness had preserved Elena's family. Elena's final confession was the most moving. "Everything about crisis was real for me," she said through tears. "I did not know if Miguel would return, if test would ever end, if I would die poor and alone in America. Fear was real. Desperation was real. Gratitude to you was real. When you paid my rent, you were not helping rich women pretending to be poor. You were saving someone who thought she had lost everything forever." 6 months later, Jasmine was leading a cybersecurity project for Vasquez Technologies, earning more in a week than she had previously made in a month. Elena had become one of her closest friends. Their relationship deepened rather than damaged by the revelation of her true circumstances. The two women often laughed about their first meeting during the storm, when both had been hiding their true situations, Elena concealing her connection to wealth, Jasmine concealing her education and intelligence behind a delivery driver's uniform. The story became legendary within the Vasquez family and their social circle. Delivery driver who sacrificed everything to help a stranger, only to discover that her kindness had connected her to opportunities she had never imagined possible. But for Jasmine, the most important lesson wasn't about reward or recognition. It was about the reminder that human decency requires no knowledge of someone's background or potential benefit to the giver. Standing in her new office overlooking Seattle, Jasmine often thought about that rainy night when she had chosen to help Elena despite having no expectation of return. The decision had been costly and risky, made from moral conviction rather than calculated advantage. It had led to a transformation she never could have planned. But more importantly, it had revealed that her instincts about human worth and dignity had been correct. Elena's son, now calling Jasmine Tia Jasmine, would grow up knowing the story of the delivery driver who gave everything to help his mother when she needed it most. In a world where wealth often isolated people from genuine human connection, Jasmine's friendship with the Vasquez family remained grounded in the authenticity of that first gesture. One stranger helping another in a moment of crises, expecting nothing in return but hoping to preserve someone else's dignity and hope. Asterisk, asterisk, if this story touched you. Imagine how many other stories of hidden struggle and unexpected kindness happen every day around us. Subscribe to discover more tales that reveal the extraordinary humanity hidden in ordinary moments, because sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the smallest acts of courage. Asterisk, asterisk.